Archie in your prayers, and not to be political, but for our Amy Coney Barrett's nomination process. Being a woman and a mother, I think for me that would be really hard to be under that kind of pressure, so pray for whatever is to be God's will on that. And St. Bernard, pray for us, and St. James, pray for us. Okay, and then just a couple business things. I'm assuming everyone that's here is already getting the emails, otherwise you probably wouldn't be here, but if you're not, just let me know. And then I did bring some boxes of joy this evening, so if you want, you can take them. We're not really collecting them until November, but you could get a jump start on that if you wanted to. Or if you don't want to take the box and you just want to take the handout as your reminder, you can take that as well. There's no, the envelopes are in the contribution envelopes are in the box, I believe. And then I'm going to be soliciting help for passing them out at Mass. We're not going to, I already had some pre-folded from last year, so that's why they are the way they are, but we are just going to have tables with the unfolded boxes and a paper flyer and the envelope so people can handle their own and we're not touching everyone else's stuff, but I would probably need a couple of people to help me with that at the Masses. So that's all I have other than an introduction of our speaker this evening, Christi Johnson. She's the wife of Deacon Dave Johnson, member of St. Bernard's for 36 years. Wow. I didn't read over it.
There's a few of us.
And has served here in many different capacities over those years. She and her husband, Deacon Dave Johnson, have been married 44 years, congratulations, and have 2 children, Chris and Katie, and 7 grandchildren. She retired from Union High School in 2016 and volunteers weekly at Porticelli House and Catholic Charities. When not walking or hiking, she enjoys cooking, reading, knitting, and puzzles.
That made me sound so old when I wrote Christi.
Take it away, Christi.
Okay. My main goal is not to fall off the stage. I titled this The Spirit of the Pilgrimage because really that's the aim of a pilgrimage, for there to be some, in my opinion, some kind of spirit of accomplishment, but of faith, and so that's what I titled it. I like this picture of Dave and I because we really do spend a lot of time in our raincoats. There's a lot of wet, seems like, on the Caminos that we've been on. Matthew Kelly says, life is a pilgrimage, but sometimes you need a pilgrimage to see your life for what it really is. And I know some of you have gone on some pilgrimages. You've gone to Israel or you've gone some different places. So you know what that's like, that you discover things about yourself when you do those pilgrimages. On the credential, I'll talk about this a little bit more, this is the Pilgrims Passport. They have this spirit of the Camino, and I love this. I think it's like a spirit of life. Live in the moment, welcome each day, its pleasures and its challenges, make others feel welcome, share, feel the spirit of those who've gone before you, imagine those who will follow you, and appreciate those who walk with you today. And that's really what happens on the Camino, because almost every day you walk with someone different. Of course, Dave and I walk together, but many times he'd start talking to somebody and I'd start talking to somebody, so we weren't always just side by side on our path. So for us, we've done 3 pilgrimages. The first one was in 2014. That was the first time we did the Camino de Santiago, which is what really this talk has been advertised about. That's the way of St. James. And we did the French way, and I'll show you what that means. Because we were both still working, we could not do the whole pilgrimage. The whole route is about 500 miles. And so we didn't have time. That would take about 6 weeks. We had about 3. So we started in Leon, Spain, and went to Santiago, and that was 250 miles. So that's kind of half. And then in 2016, we did the Camino de Santiago Portuguese way. And so we started in Porto, Portugal. And we flew into Lisbon, and we were able to go to Fatima, so that was a big treat. We didn't walk to Fatima, we trained there, and then we came back to Porto to start our Camino. And the Portuguese way, actually, in Portugal, you'll see a picture, you are on the ocean. So there's a lot of the walking is on a boardwalk. It's really very beautiful. And we went to Santiago, but we went past Santiago to Finisterre, which that means the end of the world. They thought that was the end of the world at some point. And so that was 225 miles. And then in 2019, we did the Way of St. Francis, which is we went from Assisi to Rome, and that was about 200 miles. Now, the whole history of the Camino de Santiago is kind of a legend, but as a believer, we believe it's the truth. That after Jesus' resurrection, St. James became the leader of the church in Jerusalem, and according to tradition, he also traveled to Spain to spread the good news. I think they thought he was in the Galatian area. Then he returned to Jerusalem where he was martyred. Following his death in 44 AD, his followers are said to have taken his body to the coast where a ship was miraculously waiting to take his body. And a hermit named Pelagio had a vision in which he saw a bright light shining over a spot in the forest. And the matter was investigated, and a Roman-era tomb containing St. James's body was found. The bishop of a nearby town, Theodomir, had a church built on the side of the tomb. Around this shrine, the city of Santiago de Compostela grew. While its origins are not certain, Compostela may come from the Latin Compostela, field of stars. And this is from the cathedral in Santiago, and that is where St. James's bones are. You can actually go behind the altar, and you can see you can't see his bones, but you can see the silver casket where they have it. This pilgrimage drew devout Christians from all over Europe for several reasons. In the year 1122, Pope Calixtus granted the city various privileges, including an indulgence for those who journeyed here on a pilgrimage, with special consideration given to those who made the pilgrimage in the year when the Feast of St. James fell on Sunday. And it became very popular, and even to the point that kings and queens went on pilgrimages, and so a lot of the traditions that happen on the pilgrimage, especially at the end where they have the big Buddha incense swinging, that's because they were purifying the air, because the pilgrims were pretty unclean if they had walked the whole way. So this is a map of Spain, and you can see that the French way starts up there where that one is, and that is actually, it begins in France. And so the Camino, if you do the whole Camino, you start in France, and you go over the Pyrenees, which that's probably the hardest part of the whole Camino. That's the steepest climb, and then of course coming down is also challenging. And we did not do that. And that's where it starts, and then you can kind of see in the middle where Leon is, and then Santiago's over on the left. That was so we were halfway on that. Number 1 is where we did our first Camino. And then you can see the number 3 is the Portuguese way. And so we did part of that and then went on up to Santiago. But there's lots of different ways. I know, I think it's Father Brooks did one of the different ways. He didn't do the French way. I think he might have done the primitive way. And so there's lots of different ways that you can do the Camino. But the traditional way starts from France, goes over the Pyrenees, and then goes to Santiago. The scallop shell is this symbol of the Camino. And so every pilgrim gets a shell, and sometimes you get them before you go. For example, there's a group in Tulsa called Okies on the Camino, and people who haven't even done a Camino join the group and hear all about it, and they'll have a shell ceremony before someone leaves, and they'll give them their shell. And you attach it to your backpack, and I drew an arrow so you can see mine is hanging off my backpack and it's just sort of, it's symbolic. And you'll see symbols of the shell everywhere. St. James is portrayed a lot with a shell on his hat or on his staff. The Pilgrims Passport, and that's what I was showing you, you actually apply for this before you leave from the American Pilgrims on the Camino. And the idea is that at every place you stop, you get a stamp. And to receive your credential at the end of the pilgrimage, you have to have at least walked 100 kilometers, and that's from Sarria to Santiago. It's about 75 miles or 60 miles. And so, fortunately or unfortunately, when you get to Sarria, it's crowded because there's a lot of people who start there because they want to get their credential. This is actually one from the Portuguese Camino. We framed our ones from the first Camino. And I actually I got bored getting the stamps. Sometimes it's kind of a hassle to get the stamps, except for from Santiago to Finisterre. I made an effort to get a stamp everywhere we went so I could get a credential in Finisterre. But that's what that Pilgrim's Passport looks like. Then, this is the credential. This is actually a picture of mine. And they ask you when you go to the Pilgrim's office, did you do this pilgrimage for a spiritual reason, or did you do it for, I don't really call it a secular reason, but for another reason besides a spiritual one? And I looked up the statistic in 2019, 347,578 pilgrims from around the world went to the Pilgrim's office in Santiago to receive their compostal, which is the certificate of completion. And so it's kind of a deal. It's exciting when you get into Santiago and you have to go find the Pilgrim's office and you stand in line and you can see, I don't know if you can see, but they like changed my name to Christiane or something weird, and they do it very nicely and officially. Now, the way of St. Francis is a little different. It's still a pilgrimage. And this is the one that we did in 2019. And it's called the Via Francesco. And it's different from the Camino in that it's a loose connection of important landmarks that are all a part of the story of St. Francis. So that's kind of cool because when you start, we started in Assisi, where the path took you were to important places that St. Francis had actually been. And it's not a single path that he would have walked once from start to finish. Rather, he moved across these lands over the years, stopping in different cities and spreading his message, reaching all kinds of receptive audiences. The route passes through them to see what is left of his legacy, physical and spiritual. Of course, we laughed when we were on that pilgrimage that he must have liked everything up high, because everything was a hike uphill for him. He must have felt closer to God, being up as high as he could be. And the symbol that you would see painted would be those keys, and those are the keys to Rome. This is a picture of Italy. Laverna is the official start of the Way of St. Francis, but most people start in Florence if they're beginning the northern way. The southern way begins in Assisi, where we started our walk. We met up with people, not very many people, but a few people, and they had walked we met them in Assisi and they had started in Florence. We went in May, and they had actually walked in snow. And so I would probably say that the way of St. Francis is much more physically challenging of a hike than the Camino. This is the GPS track from Assisi to Rome. With this particular route, and probably because of the technology and the markings on the trail markings not being as predictable, we lived by our GPS. And I'll talk about that. That was sort of a disadvantage to this pilgrimage. So let's just talk about why. Before our first Camino, we spent 2 weeks in Spain in 2011, and we really loved it. We loved the country. We found ourselves doing a lot of walking when we were there, and we just sort of fell in love with it. We determined we liked to walk, and we always heard that when you got older, you need to find something you enjoy doing together. So we're like, okay, we like to walk together. That might work. And so that kind of motivated us. We watched the movie The Way with Martin Sheen. Anybody seen The Way? If you haven't, it really is a cool movie and a pretty good depiction of the Camino. And we watched it a couple, 2 or 3 times. And I remember the first time our daughter and her husband watched it, they were like, okay, it's kind of a snooze. We loved it. It was great. We met with the father of Dave's assistant who had walked the Camino for his 70th birthday. So we met with him and kind of picked his brain about it. We met with Father Mike Knight, who's walked parts of the Camino. And because we talked with him, and we initially were saying, well, we think we'll start in Rosenval in France, and we'll stop in Lyon and do that half. And he's the one who said, no, you don't want to do that. You want to walk into Santiago. You don't want your pilgrimage to stop in the middle. And that was really good advice. And so we decided we were just crazy enough to do it. So how do you do it? What do you do? Well, you have to train. And train and train and train and train and repeat. And at first, what we would do, and I don't really remember in 2014 if I was walking every day just like the neighborhood. I can't remember, but I know we would go to Turkey Mountain on the weekends and we would walk. We would try to do like a 15-mile or a 10-mile where we would walk and then stop and eat lunch or go somewhere and come back, and we would split it up, and we'd just try to get miles in. And then we read this book. We read a ton of books before we went on the Camino, but we read The Slacker's Guide to the Camino. That was pretty, well, that fits. And it said, you need to be walking every day. What is difficult about the Camino, or any time you're doing a long distance hike, is the day after day after day. And so at that point, we loaded our backpacks. I think at first, my first Camino had books in my backpack, and we started walking every morning. And unfortunately, not we're morning people, but because we were both still working, I remember we got up at 10 minutes till 4. And would get out there, and we would walk. We'd walk about 5 miles, walk the river. We lived where we could actually walk to the river bank, because we lived at about 85th and Harvard. We could go up and catch the trail, and we would walk the river. We'd stop at Quick Trip on our way back and get a cup of coffee and walk the rest of the way. But we did that in that day-to-day walking. And walking in walking in your hiking boots that or your hiking shoes that you're going to use, having your backpack the way it's supposed to be is really, really important. So consequently, we were in good shape when we did the Camino. Our feet were in good shape. I didn't get any blisters. That's one of the things you'll hear a lot about, blisters, oh, horrible blisters. Well, if you're wearing the same socks and shoes, I'll show you, I'll wear sock liners and socks, and your boots, and you're wearing the ones you're going to wear, and you wear the same ones every day, and you're trained in them, it's pretty unusual to get a blister. And so that really prevented that. Now on the right, you see this kind of weird with the dates. When we were training to do the Way of St. Francis, we had to train differently because it was going to be so hilly. And it's not so much elevation, like we were just at Rocky Mountain National Park. It's not elevation like going to someplace like that where you're fighting altitude. It wasn't that. It was just that you were constantly, huffing it up the hills. So we devised a route in the neighborhood that's near us between the 71st and 81st and Harvard and Yale that has hills. And we designed hills. And so what that 33, 34, 35, 37, that's the flights of stairs that are, my iWatch would say, that we can climb. The first day out on the Way of St. Francis, we registered 216 floors. So now, were we prepared to do it? I can tell you why that happened in a minute, but were we prepared to do that? I mean, you're still huffing and puffing and stopping and resting and whining and all that. But you can get up the next morning and do it again and you're not tired. That's when you know you're in shape. You can get up the next morning and do it again. And so it was worth it. It was worth doing those hills. I still walk that neighborhood, COVID, because I got to walk in the daylight with COVID when everything was really shut down. I could walk at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Dave and I could. We found all kinds of different routes in that neighborhood. And so I don't do all that, because it was a grind. Go down here, go up here, go down here. It was not that much fun. But it definitely got us in shape. The backpack goal, that's Caroline, she's locating. We had all the kids with backpacks on the 2 pictures, but for the Camino, my backpack probably weighed 20 pounds. And I made it my goal for the St. Francis to lighten my load. I did not want to carry 20 pounds. And so I bought a different backpack that was lighter weight, and I'm going to show you that. And I got it down to 17 to 18 pounds. Today I weighed it, because I loaded it exactly like if I was getting on the plane tonight, I'd have to have my different clothes on. This would be what I would take. And I had it to about, because I have my water filled up in that, I had it at about 14 or 15. But you add stuff. You add fruit, you add food. So this is less is more. So this, and I'll show you. This is how you pack your backpack. Chacos, dock kit. I have a compression bag, which is pretty cool. I'll show it to you. With everything, all the clothes in it, your raincoat, your lunch and snack food for the day, your water bladder, and I have a waist pack that I wear, and that's where I keep like my phone and my Pilgrims Passport and sunglasses, and for St. Francis, a highlighter, and I'll tell you about that a bit. The logistics, this was Portugal, so you can see the ocean. Average miles hiked, Camino Francis, 12 to 15 miles a day. Camino Portuguese, because there was not as much infrastructure, we had made the decision that we had been to summer camp and we didn't want to go back. And so we didn't stay in albergues. We did not stay in those hostels where you sleep with 50 of your closest friends in bunk beds. We thought, we gotta have a private bath, no matter how that looked. And so we couldn't find those as readily. So we had some 19 and 20 mile days, and that's long. I probably would tell you that for Christi Johnson, 15 is my sweet spot. After that, I'm not happy too much. And then it's just a grind. But 15 is not bad. Way of St. Francis definitely cut it down because of the hills. It was 10 to 14 miles a day. I think we did an 18-mile day. One day we had to do an 18-mile day. And like I said, with lodging, private bed, private bath, bed and breakfasts. They look all different wherever you go. Hotels, rooms over bars. Sometimes at the outer days, in addition to having those bunk bed kind of rooms, they would have some private rooms, and so we would stay there. Dave made all our reservations ahead of time. Except for the first Camino, he had made like the first 3 and the last one, and then we met up with a family from France, and they shared their hotel itinerary with us, and so then we started calling ahead. And then for Camino Portuguese and for the Way of St. Francis, we had all our reservations made, which was nice. Except for we gotta go, we gotta make it to whatever town it is. And so even if you have 5 miles left and you're exhausted, it's like, that's where our reservation is, so you have to keep on going. So what you do is you hike 4 to 5 miles, then you rest, and then you repeat it. And the good news is your only job is to walk. And that's what I would, when I would get worried before, especially before we went on our first Camino, am I going to be able to do this? I would say to myself, but really, all you have to do is walk. You don't have to cook a meal, you don't have to take care of anybody, you don't have to work, you just have to walk. And so that's pretty sweet. The picture of Dave is we would buy our lunch. We'd go to the store the evening before. So you're in a little town and you go eat, and then they have a little store, grocery store, and you buy your food, your fruit, and then or whatever, and make sandwiches. And so we're stopped somewhere on the left where we're just eating lunch. The right, which is such a lovely picture of me, that's from Italy. And you can see, we're really sitting on the side of a road. There's no traffic, so there's no cars, but we're just sitting on the side of a road and I'm eating an apple. I have a little container there, and I brought powdered peanut butter, all 3 trips. And where you just mix it with water, makes peanut butter. Really, by Italy, I couldn't even stand to eat it. David and all the powder. I was like, I'm not doing it. I would just buy peanuts and eat peanuts. I just couldn't take the powdered peanut butter anymore. But you just stop and you would rest. On the Camino, it's really fun because almost every 4 or 5 miles, there's a place to stop, there's a bar, you can have a beer, you can have a coffee con leche, you meet up with other pilgrims, you can sit and chat. It's very social. St. Francis was not that way, which is why I'm sitting on the side of the road. It just wasn't that way. You have a guidebook for the Camino. This is like a Camino Bible.